everyone, in this video we will be discussing characteristics of bacteria and gram staining. So the contents of the lecture include morphological characteristics, where we will study about the cell size, shape and arrangement as well as the overall structure of the bacterial cell. We will then study about the most important component of the bacterial cell, that is the chemical composition of the cell wall. We will then study the cultural characteristics, that is the nutritional as well as the physical requirement for the growth of bacteria. We will then study about the application as well as the principle behind gram staining. Now, before understanding the morphological characteristics of bacteria, we must first know that bacteria, it is actually a type of prokaryotic cell which lacks any kind of cell-bound organelles or a well-defined nucleus. So now, since we know that bacteria, it is a type of prokaryotic cell, we can now understand about its morphological characteristics. So talking about the cell size, so bacteria is very small with a diameter of 0.5 to 1 micrometer. The smallest known bacteria belongs to the category or the genus of Mycoplasma, which have the diameter of around 0.3 micrometer. However, recent studies have also shown that there are also smaller known bacteria which are called as nanobacteria or ultrabacteria, which have a diameter of around 0.05 and less. So the benefit of this smaller size is that the smaller the size, it means the bacteria has a higher surface area or higher volume ratio, so that it can provide a larger surface for nutrient absorption as well as the release of the waste. Now, talking about the cell shapes and arrangement of a bacterial cell, it is generally assumed that the smaller the organism is, it should have a uniform shape and size. However, it is not true, because the cell shape is usually established by the cell wall as well as the environmental condition that can impact the type of the shape of the particular bacteria. So the most common arrangements and cell shapes are as follow. So the first cell shape is coccus, which is actually a spherical shape. As you can see in this diagram over here, this particular arrangement is called as monococcus, where the term coccus means spherical, and since they are present only in single form, it is called as monococcus. Similarly, when the spherical cells are present in pair or are two in number, such an arrangement is called as diplococcus. Similarly, when the spherical cells are present in a chain form, such an arrangement is called as streptococcus. Now, when the spherical cells are present in 4 number or they form a square, such an arrangement is called as tetracoccus or a tetrad. And when the spherical cells are present in form of a grape-like cluster, such an arrangement is called as staphylococcus. And when the spherical cells are present in 8 number, such an arrangement is called as sarcina. Now, there is a visual resemblance between a tetrad and a sarcina. However, technically sarcina, it is a 3D form of tetrad, and that's how we can differentiate between these two shapes. Now, the next type of cell shape is bacillus. So bacillus, it is a rod shaped cell. As you can see here in this image, this rod shape is called as bacillus, or the cylindrical shape is called as bacillus. Now, just like coccus, if the bacillus is present in 2 numbers, such an arrangement is called as diplobacillus, as you can see in this image. And similarly, when this bacillus form or the rod shaped cells are present end to end form, such an arrangement is called as streptobacillus. Now, apart from it, there is also an arrangement which is called as corniform bacillus. So it is a type of arrangement where the cells are arranged in such a form that they form an angle to form a V or a L-shape arrangement, and it is most commonly found in Corynebacterium. The next type of cell arrangement is called as Coccobacillus. So this typical shape, it is an intermediate shape between coccus and bacillus. As you can see in this image, this is a typical Coccobacillus arrangement or shape. Now, coming to the next cell shape, it is helical or spiralum, and these are generally rigid helical cells. So, as you can see in this image, this is a particular spiral shape of a bacteria, and when this spiral is highly flexible, such an arrangement is called as spirochete. So as you can see here, this is a spirochete. Now apart from it, the other arrangement is vibrio. So vibrio is generally a term which we call to a bacteria that have a curve or a comma shape. So as you can see in this image over here, this is a typical vibrio shape. Similarly, when there is no constant shape and a particular bacteria can exhibit different variety of shape, such an phenomena is called as pleomorphism, and such an particular shape is called as pleomorphic shape. The other shapes are pear shape. For example, it happens in the organisms such as bacteria, which have a typical pear-like shape. Then there are lobed spheres, and there are also rods with helical structures. Now we will understand the different parts of the bacteria in detail. So as you can see, this is a typical bacterial structure which have different organelles. For example, here we can see a long tail like structure which is called as flagellum. Then there are small thread like projection all over the body which are called as villi. Then there is a capsule, there is an endospore, there is a plasmid, chromosome, ribosomes all over the body, and there is cytoplasm. And the most important part includes the cell membrane as well as the cell wall. So we will understand about all these organelles in detail in three ways. So we will first study about the structures which are present outside the cell wall. So this grey colored portion is the cell wall. So we will first study about the structure which are external to the cell wall. So as we just saw, the first structure is flagella. So flagella, it is a hair-like helical appendage that protrude through the cell wall and allow motility. So in short, flagella, it is the locomotive organ of a bacteria, and it is responsible for the motion of the particular bacteria. Now based on the pattern and the distribution of this flagella, there can be different type of bacteria. For example, as you can see in this image, the first bacteria do not have any flagella, and such an bacteria is called as atrichous bacteria, where trichous mean hair. So since there is no hair like flagella, it is called as atrichous. Similarly, in the second image, we can see there is only a single flagella. So it is a monotrichous, where mono means one and trichous mean hair. So this is a monotrichous bacteria. Similarly, in the next image, there are two flagella at the opposite ends. So this bacteria is called as amphitrichous, where amphi means at both the ends. Similarly, when there are number of flagellas at both the ends, such an arrangement or such an bacteria is called as cephalotrichous. Similarly, in the next image, there are flagella all around the body of the bacterial cell. So such an bacteria is called as peritrichous, where peri means all around and trichous is again hairs. And the next type of bacteria is lophotrichous, where we can see there are a bunch of flagella at one particular end, or there is a particular tuft. So such an arrangement is called as lophotrichous. Now talking about the parts of flagella, as we can see in this image over here, the parts of flagella can be divided into three types. So the first part is this long tail, which is responsible for the motion of the particular bacteria, and this long tail is called as filament. The next part is this basal gray body, which is being joined to the filament with the third part, which is called as hook. So there are three parts, that is the long filament, junction zone or hook, and the basal body. So the basal body is attached to the cell membrane of the bacterial body. Now talking about the next structure which is external to the cell wall is pili or fimbriae. So unlike flagella, it is a non-motile, hollow, non-helical filamentous appendages which are thinner and even shorter and numerous than flagella. So as we saw in the image earlier, they were many in number, and they are not responsible for the locomotion. So the function of the pili is to provide a port where the transport of the genetic material or the DNA occurs. So such an pili is called as F pilus or 6 pillars that provide a port for the entry of genetic material during the bacterial mating. Now the other structure which is external to the cell wall is a capsule. So a capsule is a viscous covering layer that is all around the cell wall. Now if this capsule is very thin, such a capsule is called as microcapsule, and if it is so abundant that there are plenty of cells which are embedded in the matrix, such a capsule is called as slime layer. Now the function of this capsule layer is to prevent the bacteria from any kind of desiccation, because this capsule is made up of around 70% of water. Now coming to the next structure which is external to the cell wall is sheath. So sheath, it is a chain or trichome of bacteria that is enclosed in a hollow tube, and it is called as sheath. The next the structure external to the cell wall is prosthesia. So it is a semi-rigid extension of the cell wall as well as cytoplasmic membrane, and the function of prosthesia is to increase the surface area for better nutrition as well as the absorption of the cell wall. The last structure which is external to cell wall is stalks. So stalks are the ribbon-like tubular appendages which help in the attachment of the cell to the surface. So stalks are responsible for providing a grip to bacteria in the environment. Now coming to the structures internal to the cell wall, the first structure is plasma membrane, which is also called as cell membrane or cytoplasmic membrane, and it is the most important part of the cell wall, and it lies just beneath the cell wall. So it is around 7.5 nanometer thick, and it is generally made up of two important things, that is phospholipids and proteins. So the phospholipids are generally less and are around 20 to 30%, while proteins are more in a particular plasma membrane, ranging from 60 to 70%. So as you can see in this diagram over here, the phospholipid or the lipid portion of the plasma membrane is generally present in a bilayer form. As you can see, there are lipids in a bilayer form, and the hydrophobic part or the non-polar parts are extended inwards, while the polar or the hydrophilic parts are extended outwards. So the circular region is the hydrophilic part, and these long tails are hydrophobic parts. So these together form a lipid bilayer. Now talking about the proteins, the membrane proteins are generally of two types, that is peripheral protein, which is present at the periphery of the bilayer, and next is the integral protein, which is present inside the lipid bilayer. So this peripheral protein is loosely attached and can easily be extracted out. However, the integral protein is very tightly attached in the lipid bilayer and cannot be easily extracted during any unfavorable circumstances. Now apart from these phospholipids and proteins, there are also certain other components which are present in plasma membrane. As you can see here, there are cholesterol or hoponoids which are responsible for providing sternness or rigidity to the plasma membrane. Now the most important function of this plasma membrane is that it provides a hydrophobic barrier to the penetration by any kind of water molecules, and it is also responsible for synthesizing the capsular as well as the cell wall components. So overall, plasma membrane, it is a semi-permeable membrane which allow the transport of required nutrients all across the membrane. Now apart from plasma membrane, the other structures which are internal to the cell wall include protoplast and spheroplast, which are often confused. So let's just understand about these terms. So protoplast is generally plasma membrane, and everything within the plasma membrane is called as protoplast. As you can see in this image, if this pink circular outline is cell membrane, and everything inside this is considered as protoplast, while spheroplast is cytoplasmic membrane or cell membrane as well as the outer membrane of the cell wall. Now coming to the next structure which is internal to the cell wall is cytoplasm. So cytoplasm, it is the cell material bounded by the cytoplasmic membrane, and it can be divided into three portions. So the first portion is the fluid portion with dissolved substances. The second is the cytoplasmic area, which has certain granular appearance, which is granular in appearance, that is, and it is rich in macromolecular RNA protein bodies, that is ribosomes. And next is the chromatin area, which is rich in DNA. So as we can see in this image, this pink layer is plasma membrane, and inside this plasma membrane is cytoplasm. So in this cytoplasm, this yellow portion is the liquid or the fluid portion, which have different fluid which have different dissolved substances. So the first dissolved substance is these pink bodies, which are nothing but the ribosomes, and which are responsible for the synthesis of protein. Then apart from it, we can also see certain inclusion bodies which are present inside the cytoplasm. And the next most important thing is this chromatin area, which is rich in DNA or the nuclear material, and it is called as nucleoid. So talking about the next structures which are internal to the cell wall, as we just now saw, the cytoplasmic inclusions or vacuoles. So there are different inclusions and vacuoles in different kind of bacteria. So few of them include volutin granules. So these volutin granules are also called as metachromatic inclusions, and they are the source of phosphate in the bacteria. Apart from it, there is also polybeta hydroxybutyrate, or what we can see PHB, and it acts as a reserve of carbon as well as energy source. And the next cytoplasmic inclusion is gas vacuoles. So these gas vacuoles are particularly found in aquatic bacteria, and they are responsible for providing buoyancy in such bacteria. Now the next and the most important part is the nuclear material. So as we discussed that bacteria, it is a prokaryotic cell and do not have a defined nucleus. So in bacteria, there is no defined nucleus, but there is a certain non-discrete structure which is present in the center, and it is called as nucleoid. It is also called as chromatin body or nuclear equivalent or even bacterial chromosome. So this nucleus or the nucleoid, it is composed of 60% of DNA, 30% of RNA and 10% of protein by weight. Now the other structures internal to the cell wall include cysts. So cysts are the dormant, thick-walled, desiccation-resistant forms that develop by the differentiation of vegetative cell and germinate later under suitable conditions. So, however, these cysts are not at all heat resistant. So, these are again the structure which are internal to the cell wall. Similarly, there are spores which are also present inside the cell wall. So, the bacterial spores can produce inside as well as outside the bacteria. So those spores which are produced inside the cell are called as endospores, while those which are present external to the cell are called as exospores. So these spores, just like cysts, they are metabolically dormant, and these are formed under unfavorable conditions, and they undergo germination and they outgrow to form a vegetative cell. So based on the position of the spore, there can be different type of position of the spores. So as we can see in this image, the first image, since we can see the spore, it is present at the center of the bacterial cell. It is called as central spore position, and when the spore is present a little away from the center and also a little away from the extreme end, such a position is called as subterminal. However, when the spore is present as the extreme end, such a spore position is called as terminal spore position. And there is another condition where the spore is present at the terminal, however the sporangium is swollen. So such a condition is called as, or such a spore position is a terminal spore with a swollen sporangium. Now talking about the endospores, since we are talking about the structures internal to the cell wall, so these endospores particularly are resistant to desiccation, even staining and disinfecting chemicals, and even radiations as well as heat. So as we discussed earlier, the cysts are just like spores, but the only thing which was different in them that they were not heat resistant. but endospores are heat resistant. So the reason that endospores are heat resistant is because of the presence of two compounds, that is dipyloclonic acid, which is DPA, and calcium. So the presence of these two components is responsible for providing the heat resistant nature to the endospore. Now the process of formation of spore, it is called as sporogenesis or sporulation, and as we discussed that when a bacteria is going to die and it is under unfavorable conditions, for example there is lack of nutrient or any kind of unfavorable condition, in such a particular phase the sporogenesis or the process of formation of spore begins. So let's just try to understand this process in detail. So as we can see, there is a particular cycle of endospore formation, and this is actually a 7-step complex cycle. So as we just now said that during the lack of nutrients, the cell growth stops and the cells start to divide. So as the cell starts to divide, the first step is the formation of axial filament. So the nuclear membrane or the plasma membrane start to form a filament. So as we can see, there is a formation of a filament. The next step is the formation of a septum. So as the plasma membrane completely forms a septum and engulf the nuclear material, so the third step is the engulfment of the forespore, where all the nuclear material starts getting inside the formed forespore. So as we can see here, the complete transfer of the material or the nuclear material has been occurred. So the next step is cortex formation, where the outer cortex starts to form. So in this particular stage, the accumulation of DPA and calcium begins. After this cortex formation, the next step is the synthesis of protein coat. So beneath this cortex is the protein coat. So as this protein coat starts to begin, the next step is the completion of the coat synthesis, and it is responsible for increasing the refractility and heat resistance. And the last step is the lysis of the sporangium and the liberation of the spores. So when the lysis enzymes finally break down the spore, the final free spore or the endospore is obtained. So as we can see, the structure of this endospore, it has various components. So the first layer of this endospore is exosporium, which is a very thin and a delicate layer which covers the endospore. Beneath this exosporium is a spore coat, and beneath this spore coat is cortex, which is made up of peptidoglycan, and beneath this cortex is the main core of the spore, which contain all type of required materials, which includes ribosomes and even the nucleoid, but all these things are in a metabolic inactive form. So this is the cycle of endospore formation. Now coming to the next part, that is the chemical composition of the cell wall. So as we saw that cell wall, it lies just outside the plasma membrane, and it is one of the most important part of prokaryotic cell, as it gives them shape and it protects from osmolytic lysis, and it is even a differentiating factor between the gram positive as well as the gram negative bacterial cells. So the most important part of this cell wall is peptidoglycan or murin. It is also called as murin. So this peptidoglycan, it is the shape determining part of the cell wall, and it is insoluble, porous and a cross-linked polymer with strength and rigidity. So as we just now said that this peptidoglycan, it is a polymer. So this peptidoglycan is a polymer of two sugar derivatives, which are N-acetyl glucosamine and N-acetyl mumaric acid. So as we can see in this image, this is a image of a peptidoglycan. So there are two sugar units, that is NAM and NAG. which are being attached to different amino acids or a layer of peptide. And similarly, this particular structure is being attached to another peptidoglycan with the help of a peptide interbridge, and this whole unit make a peptidoglycan. And when there are several units of these peptidoglycan, it make a cell wall. Now, based on the composition or the number of these peptidoglycan units, we can also differentiate between gram-positive as well as gram-negative bacteria. So, talking about the walls of gram-positive bacteria, as we said, the quantity of peptidoglycan in gram-positive bacteria is around 50% of the cell wall, and in gram-negative bacteria it is only 10%. So, in case of gram-positive bacteria, the peptidoglycan is very high. Apart from peptidoglycan, there are also certain other substances which are present in the cell wall of gram-positive bacteria, which include polysaccharides and teichoic acids. So, these teichoic acids, the structure of this particular teichoic acid you can see here in this image. So, teichoic acid is made up of a phosphate unit which is being attached to a glycerol unit and a amino acid or a sugar unit. So, and this particular structure is called as teichoic acid. And when this teichoic acid and the property of this teichoic acid is that it allows the peptidoglycan layer to attach to the plasma membrane with the help of covalent bonds. And when these teichoic acid is being linked to plasma membrane with the help of lipids, so such an arrangement or such a case is called as lipoteichoic acid. So, as we said, the teichoic acid are connected either to the peptidoglycan itself by a covalent bond with a 6-hydroxyl group of N-acetyl acid, or to the plasma membrane lipids. So, when this teichoic acid is linked to the plasma membrane lipids, such a case is called as lipoteichoic acids. Now, talking about the walls of gram-negative bacteria, the very important and the distinguished factor of gram-negative bacteria that it has an outer membrane, which is the unique part of gram-negative bacteria, and this outer membrane is not present in gram-positive bacteria. So, this outer membrane surrounds the layer of peptidoglycan. So, this outer membrane is attached to the peptidoglycan with the help of Brown's lipoprotein. So, this brown lipoprotein is the major protein which is present in the peptidoglycan of a gram-negative bacteria, and is responsible for attaching the outer membrane to the peptidoglycan with the help of the covalent bonds. So, just like the plasma membrane, outer membrane, it is also a bi-layer structure that consists mainly of proteins, lipids and lipopolysaccharides. So, the most important component of this outer membrane is lipopolysaccharide. So, this lipopolysaccharide in the outer membrane is generally consists of 3 different parts. So, the first part is a lipid A. So, lipid A, it is embedded in the membrane. The next part is a core polysaccharide which is located at the membrane surface, and the third part is the O antigen, which extend like whiskers from the membrane surface to the surrounding. So, as you can see in this image of gram-negative bacteria, there is a plasma membrane, then there is this peptidoglycan layer, and then there is an additional outer membrane. And as we discussed, there are 3 components of outer membrane, where there is the most important part is the lipopolysaccharide, and in lipopolysaccharide again there are 3 important components. So, the first is lipid A, which is embedded inside the outer membrane. Then there is a core polysaccharide. So, as you can see, these large polysaccharides are the core polysaccharide which is located at the membrane, and then there are these O antigens which are extending outwards in form of whiskers. So, these are the O specific chains or O antigens. So, you can also see the chemical structure of lipopolysaccharide here, where this lipid A, it is consist of 2 sugar units attached to the fatty acid, and this lipid A is attached to a core polysaccharides where there are different number of polysaccharides units. So this polysaccharide can range from bacteria to bacteria. So this layer can be, or the number of amino acid can be 10 in one bacteria and it can be 100 in another bacteria. So this varies from bacteria to bacteria. And then there is another polysaccharide chain which is called as O side chain, which is responsible or which act in form of whiskers. Now coming to the next topic, the culture characteristics required for the growth of bacteria. The first thing is nutritional requirements for the growth. Now just like any other organism, bacteria also require energy for their growth, and those bacteria which rely on chemical substances for their energy are called as chemotrophs. Similarly, those bacteria which rely on light for the source of energy are called as phototrophs. Now apart from energy, bacteria also require electrons for their nutrition. So those bacteria which rely on inorganic compounds are called as lithotrophs, or these are those bacteria which reduce inorganic compounds to obtain electrons. Similarly, when the source of this inorganic compound is chemical source, such organism or such bacteria are called as chemolithotrophs. Similarly, when the source of this inorganic compound is through light, such organisms or such bacteria are called as photolithotrophs. Similarly, those bacteria which require or which rely upon organic compounds for electrons are called as organotrophs, and similarly chemoorganotrophs and photoorganotrophs. Now those bacteria which require carbon or carbon dioxide as their sole source of carbon are called as autotrophs, and when those bacteria which require inorganic carbon for their carbon source are called as heterotrophs. Now apart from these energy, electrons and carbon, bacteria also require nitrogen for their nutrition. So bacteria can obtain nitrogen from inorganic nitrogenous compounds, for example nitrates or nitrites, or by organic compounds such as amino acids. And apart from nitrogen, the other required nutritional requirement for the growth of bacteria are oxygen, sulfur, phosphorus, then again metal ions, and the very important vitamins and water is again very important for the nutritional growth of bacteria. Now coming to the physical requirement for the growth of bacteria, the first factor is temperature. Now based on temperature, there can be three types of bacteria. So the first is psychrophiles. So psychrophiles are those bacteria which grow at a temperature of 0 degrees Celsius or even lower. However, the optimum growth temperature, that means the optimum temperature is that temperature where the maximum growth is shown. So for psychrophiles, the optimum growth temperature is generally 15 degrees Celsius. Then the next type of bacteria are called as mesophiles. So mesophiles are those bacteria that grow at a temperature ranging from approx 25 to 40 degrees Celsius. Then there are thermophiles. So thermophiles, as the name themselves suggests, that they philes, that means loving, and thermo means heat. So these are those organisms that love heat, or those bacteria which can survive in the high temperature. So they grow best at temperature above 45 degrees Celsius. Now the next type of physical requirement is the gaseous requirement. So the two basic or the principal gases which are required for the growth of bacteria, as we just now discussed, are oxygen and carbon dioxide. So those bacteria, so based on these gases, there can be different type of bacteria. So the first type of bacteria is aerobic bacteria. So the name itself suggests that these bacteria grows in presence of oxygen. So that's why they are called as aerobic bacteria. Now the another type of bacteria is anaerobic bacteria. So these bacteria, they do not require oxygen to obtain energy, and they do not grow in the presence of oxygen. And however, anaerobic bacteria can be of two types. So some anaerobic bacteria can tolerate a little level of oxygen, and such bacteria are called as tolerant anaerobes. That means they can tolerate a little amount of oxygen. But there are some bacteria that cannot tolerate any amount of oxygen, and such bacteria are called as strict anaerobes. Now the next type of bacteria is facultative anaerobic bacteria, and these are those bacteria which can grow both in presence or absence of oxygen, and they are not really bothered by the presence or absence of oxygen, and that's why they are called as facultative anaerobic bacteria. The other type of bacteria is microaerophilic bacteria. So these are those bacteria that require low level of oxygen for growth but cannot tolerate oxygen present in the air atmosphere. So microaerophilic bacteria, they again require low level of oxygen, but again they cannot tolerate all the type of or all oxygen. So as we can see here in this image, in the first image, so in the nutritional medium we can see it is obligate aerobes. So these are the aerobic bacteria. So we can see here at the top of the test tube or the top of the nutritional medium where the oxygen is the most. So there grow the aerobes. Now in the next test tube or in the next nutritional medium, it is written facultative anaerobes. So as we said that facultative anaerobes can grow both in presence as well as in absence of oxygen. So that's why the aerobes are all over the nutritional medium. Next is the aerotolerant anaerobes. So these are those bacteria which aerotolerant. So these, it means they can tolerate the oxygen. So again there are also present all over the nutritional medium. Now strict anaerobes. So as we discussed that strict anaerobes cannot tolerate any kind of oxygen. That's why they are present at the bottom of the nutritional medium where there is no oxygen at all. And next is microaerophiles. So microaerophiles, as we said, they require a very little amount of oxygen and not all of it. So that's why they are present somewhat at the middle of the test tube or the nutritional medium, where there is a little amount of oxygen present. Now coming to the next factor, the physical requirement, that is pH. So based on pH also there can be three different type of bacteria. So the first is neutrophiles. So as the name itself suggests, these are neutral bacteria and they grow optimally at the pH within a neutral pH. And the microorganism includes E. coli, Staphylococcus, Salmonella. So these are those bacteria which grow at the pH of 7. Then there are acidophiles. So these are those bacteria which grow optimally at a lesser pH or at acidic pH level. And the example is lactobacillus, and that's why the lactobacillus is always found in the milk and milk products, because these are acidic products. Then there are alkaliphiles. So alkaliphiles, they grow best at a pH between 8 to 10 to 10.5, that is at the alkaline pH, and the example of such bacteria is Vibrio cholera. Now apart from pH and temperature and gas, the another factor which is responsible for the physical growth of the bacteria is pressure. Now the pressure is important particularly in those type of bacteria which are isolated from the deep ocean, because in such bacteria which are isolated from oceans, pressure is very important and it plays a significant role in the bacterial growth and determining the different characteristics of such bacteria. Now coming to the next topic, gram staining. So as we discussed that gram staining, it is a very crucial staining technique in microbiology, and till date it is very important staining technique which is used to differentiate between gram positive and gram negative bacteria. And this technique gets its name from a Danish bacteriologist, Hans Christian Gram, who first introduced it in 1882, and since then till now this technique is very popular in microbiology. So the basic principle of gram staining is the ability of the bacterial cell wall to retain the crystal violet dye during the solvent treatment. So before understanding the principle, let's just try to understand the basic process of gram staining. So first of all, a bacterial cell is taken on a glass slide and a smear is made, and then the first or the primary dye is being added, that is crystal violet, and it is kept for 60 seconds. Then it is washed off and another fixing dye, that is iodine, is being added for 60 seconds, and this step is called as fixation of the dye. And in this particular step, the crystal violet and iodine complex is being made, and then the next step is the decolorization step, where the crystal violet and iodine complex is being decolorized using alcohol, and this step generally takes 5 to 10 seconds. Following the decolorization step, the next step is the last step, where the counter dye is being added, and the counter dye is called safranin. So it is being added for 45 seconds and then it is washed off, and then based on the color of the bacterial cell, we can differentiate between gram positive and gram negative bacteria. So the microorganisms that retain the color of the primary color, that is crystal violet, and appear purple because the color of the primary color was purple. So those microorganisms that retain the color, the purple color of the primary stain, and appear purple under the microscope are called as gram positive bacteria, while those organisms that do not take the color of the primary dye and appear pink under the microscope are called as gram negative bacteria. Now the reason why gram positive appear purple and gram negative appear pink is that the reason lies on the very fact that we understood in the earlier slide. So as we discussed that gram positive microorganisms have a very higher peptidoglycan content, while the gram negative cell wall has a very thin peptidoglycan content. So talking about gram positive bacteria, because the peptidoglycan content is very high, the initial diiodine complex was retained even by the decolorization process, because the thick layer allowed the complex to retain in the wall, and it was very less decolorized by the alcohol, and that's why the cell wall appear purple. While in contrast, in case of gram negative bacteria, since the peptidoglycan is very thin and it is not that much complex and is not that much highly cross-linked and has big large poles, so when the decolorizing was done using the alcohol, the crystal violet and the iodine complex was easily extracted from the cell wall because of the larger porous space, and that's why there was no color of the crystal violet, while there was the color of the last counter dye which was added to identify the last color. So that's why the color of the gram negative bacteria is pink, that is the color of the counter stain, and the color of the gram positive cell wall is the color of the primary dye. So this was all about characteristics of bacteria and gram staining. Thank you for watching.